Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Arinda Talks. Today we will talk about book Rogers and a little bit of Star Trek. Let me introduce you to my guest, Paul Watson. Buck Rogers is a sci-fi adventure hero and feature comic strip created by Philip Francis Nowland. It first appears in daily U.S. newspaper on January 7, 1929, and subsequently appearing in the Sunday newspaper, international newspaper, books, and multiple media with adaptations, including radio in 1932, a serial film and television series, and other formats. NASA astronaut William Rogers meets with a freak accident, causing his body to be frozen in time. Science revive him during a nuclear war in 2491, after which he embarks on several adventures. Well guys, let me introduce you to Paul. Hello Paul.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Well, it's an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about Buck Rogers, and before we start this recording, you already told me a few things about what you have been encountered with the actors, etc. So, how'd you come in interesting in Buck Rogers?
Well, as I think as mentioned before we started the interview, I'm a huge Star Trek fan and grew up on it. And I never watched cartoons. It was just Star Trek, the original series. It went into a lot of reruns after 1972. And then it's what I would call a desert of no science fiction on TV, no live science fiction until about the early, like 1976, 78, and to 78 when they started up. And I think the most prominent one to me was Battlestar Galactica. And then immediately after that, Buck Rogers in the 24th Century came on. Actually, Buck Rogers was 1979. But that sustained, I think, a lot of us fans who were really wanting sci-fi, live action sci-fi with good 1 hour episodic TV. And that's all there was. And like Battlestar Galactica was canceled after 1 year. So you had this short run of a really cool series, then it was off the air. So there was a lot of, I guess Hollywood wasn't putting a lot of money and a lot of trust into doing science fiction. So when Buck Rogers came out, that was a great concept. You had time travel, you had, time travel, he was asleep until the 24th century, and a lot of the adventure stories similar that most of us sci-fi fans were used to. So that's what got me hooked on it originally.
Okay, nice. So tell the listeners what you have been encountered with the actors when you met them on conventions, etc. Because before we started, you already told some things, and I was thinking, okay, nice to know.
Right. I think it was, there was a convention in Dallas. It's relatively medium size, not a real large one. It was called the Dallas Comic Show. And they had Anne Lockhart, who was from Battlestar Galactica, was there. Gil Gerard was there, the star of Buck Rogers. And and Aaron Gray. And Aaron Gray had just gotten through shooting her scenes in Star Trek Continues with Vic Metagania, or the Star Trek Continues. And it was also the weekend right after, sorry, I forget his name. Actually, I don't want to go down that path. It's a little too depressing. But Anne Lockhart and I were talking, and she introduced me to Aaron Gray, and they sat. We probably talked for like an hour and a half at the table because it was not a crowded convention. And Aaron Gray shared a few stories that turned out during Buck Rogers. She basically got divorced and she became a single mom, and she started So she would have to bring her child to the set. And she said she remembered one scene where Gil Gerard's got Felix Silla, who plays Tweaky, got him in his arms, and they've got an explosion. Actually, these are live pyrotechnics behind them, and they are just running right towards her, and she's standing there holding her little child, and they just fall right in front of her. And she's like, my kids never, she goes, that's the perfect thing to traumatize your child. So, but she said after the show went off the air, she shared that, she didn't know what she was going to do with her career. She said, I took acting. I didn't really have any skills. And she had a meeting. She said, I went and had lunch with Barbara Luna and one other actress. And she said, I just don't know what I'm going to do. She goes, honey, you should go to the conventions. She said, well, what am I going to do there? She goes, believe me, people are going to want to see you. And so she ended up getting so active in the convention circuit, it brought her an income to raise her kids by herself. And then she started her own business where she was an agent for people like Gil Gerard and Felix Silla, where they would pay her 10% of their takings, and she would organize getting them to the convention, making sure they had lunch. She goes, we actors, we need to be fed. I remember her saying that. She goes, worst thing you do is go to a convention. You're at a table all day. You don't get any water, don't get any food. So she set up kind of like an agent. She was like an agent, but she didn't take the usual agent fee, like 25%. She said, I just want 10%. And she has several actors that's all she does is book them and, organize all of their conventions. And it was just really a motivating story, and and now Felix Silla, and meeting him was a whole other thing. I was dressed up as a Jedi. It was back probably 6 years ago, and I was at this convention that we have in Dallas it's AllCon. It's really, the convention's more for the cosplayers than it is your standard sci-fi convention. But they had decided to bring in almost the entire cast of Battlestar Galactica, and Felix Silla came in to represent, Buck Rogers. And he comes in, I think Gil Gerard was there as well. So Felix is wandering around the lobby, and he's all mad. And I ran into him, and I was like, can I help you with something? And he's like, I can't find anybody who works at the convention. I'm trying to find the vendor room. I got to set my stuff up. And I was like, well, just follow me. I'll show you. So I took him around all the back hallways and got him to the room. And he started, getting a little more calmed down, wasn't as mad. And finally, one of the handlers came up, and boy, he just chewed them out. It was hilarious. I mean, Felix, he's probably maybe 3.5 feet tall. He's not real tall, but boy, I'll tell you, when he starts talking to somebody, you'd think he's 7 feet tall, because he really puts the...
I can relate to that because I'm small as well, so I can relate to that. And I always say, yes, we are small, and sometimes don't see us, but boy, we are there when we are open our mouth.
But he was really nice to me. He was very respectful, thanked me for my help and all that. And I think he got it that I was respectful of him. I wasn't just didn't ignore him. He was walking. I could tell he was lost and frustrated. And I just walked up to him. I knew it. It took me a second. I was like, I think I know this guy, because again, that's the one thing that actors, I think, suffer from. And they also are aware of it when they're in a full costume and their face is not showing and their voice is not coming out. It's almost like they feel like anybody could play that role, so it's difficult for them, but he really made it work. It was just, and there's a lot of big, like Kenny Baker in Star Wars, he made it work. And
I wanted to mention him,
Yeah, but it's, when you remove the mask and then the actor gets some screen time, that's kind of cool, but yeah, he was a really nice guy. But that's been my experience with the actors, just in terms of personal. I do know Gil Gerard. He had a guy come up to the table. I was standing talking to him, and a guy came up and wanted him to sign. He had a record album with all the musical scores from Buck Rogers in the 24th century, and he wanted Gil to sign it Buck Rogers. And he goes, my name isn't Buck Rogers. I'm Gil Gerard. If I'm going to autograph something, I'm going to use my name. And him and the guy argued for like 5 minutes, and I was just sitting there laughing. And finally, the guy goes, okay, just sign it that way. I don't get that. Everybody knows that Gil Gerard was Buck Rogers. So, yeah, so Sophia's agreeing. She's like, well, I told her that story before. It's like, what is this? I said, I don't know. Some people are avid fan collectors, but, anybody could sign Buck Rogers, but you see Gil Gerard's signature, that's, that's your
huge,
legal
yeah.
signature. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh wow, this is, that would to me raise the value of it, which I don't even want to get started on that story. I think people who take collectibles to get signatures just to resell them, I just think that's nuts. I
Mm.
just talking to an actor, I usually don't ever get their autograph. I'll get their pictures. Sometimes they'll autograph them, but just seeing them and hearing them tell their little stories of all the weird stuff that went on behind the scenes is enough for me. That's priceless.
So, talking about cosplay, have you ever cosplayed a character from Buck Rogers?
Let's see. I don't think I have actually, because it's not. I've not. Again, that's probably just due to funds and how much stuff I could afford. I don't think I ever have. I was thinking. I was talking to somebody. This guy David Martino, who's out of Dallas. He does stuff, everything from Back to the Future. He even built the phone booth from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I mean, he loves. I do remember him mentioning wanting to get together a group and building something like that at one point. But again, it's everybody getting together and having the time, one, to design it, come up with it, and then meeting up. That's always been the difficulty with cosplay. And we've had that issue with Pathfinder, just getting people together to do our photo shoots and so forth. But no, I think if I were to cosplay, I'd probably, I like Buck Rogers in his dress uniform, the one it's black with the gold trim on it. I mean, it's very clean, very sharp. It
really reminds me from the uniform from Star Trek Discovery in the fourth season. Yeah, it's. I must say, I just started today to watch the series again, and it was super hilarious. I of course, this is a long time ago I watched Buck Rogers, but it was so hilarious. The whole scenes and Tiki. Yeah, I love Tiki, but it's like,
oh yeah,
it's so funny, but it was so hilarious with some of the, and what you say also, it's in the area when Battlestar Galactica, the original one, was out, and it's in the same sphere. It's in the same, yeah.
And there's not as much. Yeah, and some of the acting wasn't as great. Some of the writing wasn't as great, but it was all we had. I mean, literally, and that's why they were so popular. I mean, I think Buck Rogers went from 1979 to 1981. Battlestar Galactica only lasted just for the year of 1978. But, they came back and did a whole reboot of the series, which I thought was fantastic. And there's been talk of them redoing Buck Rogers and doing another Buck Rogers movie. Or maybe even
I
a series.
have heard about it too, yeah.
I think it's, it's all the fans that end up bringing it back, because that's the bottom line is how it happens. Enough people start, there's a buzz about it and they really want to see more of it. But just like Star Trek, I mean, that was the same that happened with Star Trek. It was the fans that brought it back.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know, my theory, Star Wars saved Star Trek. People don't realize that. There's all these factions against it about, saying, oh, you're either a Star Wars fan or a Star Trek fan. I didn't know anything about
both.
Yeah, but when Star Wars, the original, came out in 1977, that I didn't even want to go see it. My cousin, she said, oh, you got to see this movie. You love Star Trek, you got to see it. I was blown away, the special effects and the story. Well, so were Paramount executives, and they were thinking on doing a second series of Star Trek. When they saw this, no, we got to do a movie. So it kicked off the movie franchise for Star Trek and saved it. So, I mean, they realized they had a money machine, and that went on up until the mid-90s. Their movies, and I think 2003 was when the very last Star Trek movie came out, before they started doing the reboot movies with J.J. Abrams, and then of course all the new series that have popped up. But yeah, that was we've had two golden ages of Star Trek. But again, that's fan driven, and it's going to take that for Buck Rogers to get that. There's going to have to be that kind of drive, and I think people are, I think Star Trek's going to oversaturate the market at a certain point, and people are going to be craving some other type of sci-fi drama and adventure that's long lasting. And I think Buck Rogers would probably be the next one, especially in terms of quality of the series.
So if they are going to do a reboot of Buck Rogers, what do you think how the fans will react on that?
Well, it depends on who they get to play Buck Rogers. That's always, I've noticed with fans, they're always picky about who plays it, but I think they could do a lot with it. I mean, the fact that I thought that was very cutting edge when they had it that he was a shuttle pilot and he got frozen and just, suspended animation until he, and then was found later in the future. They could probably do something like that he goes through a wormhole. Of course, that would kind of steal from Farscape a little. We don't want to. So who knows? But still, a man, and it could even be a female. They could switch the character to where that could be a nickname. I mean, I could see them going all kinds of ways with it. I mean, it could be somebody like, Ilana Rogers, but her nickname is Buck. You know how the most pilots in the Air Force and Navy, like, Maverick or Goose or something like, that kind of thing. That's just her nickname. So they could do it like that. And then it's just a person out of time. And then they wake up and they have this experience from our century to take to a future that's forgotten some of the key values and key decisions and maybe, help save the earth. I mean, that's kind of what they were going with when they started the 1979 Buck Rogers. So they could do a lot with it. And I really don't think, because it's totally different. The Buck Rogers from 1979 is completely different from the old, what we used to call serial movies that were in the 1930s or 1940s. I can't remember which year it was, but they were black and white, short, 20, 30-minute films, and they'd show them along with a feature movie in the theater. So each time you go to the theater, before the movie you went to see, you'd see a short little episode of Buck Rogers. And it was, it was very low tech sci-fi. So, I mean, so you go from that to the 1979 Buck Rogers, they're completely different. So I think those fans would probably be a lot more forgiving of a completely different story, a completely different look, even as long as it's kind of got the adventures, the same adventurous writing that they had in both the prior incarnations of Buck Rogers.
So let's talk about the characters in Buck Rogers, starting with Buck Rogers, of course. What are your thoughts about his character?
I love the character. In fact, I use this line all the time because it's my favorite line from the movie. When I think it's the Draconians, the Draconian queen captures him, and they're at some ball, and he walks up and he has them put on some music, and he starts kind of dancing, and she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "It's called getting down. Does it scare you?" I was like, I love that. He just pulled that off so well. He was being the club guy, and he said, when she asked him what the music was from, he says, "It's 3 Dog Night, baby." I mean, just all of the little pop culture references. I just thought that was, it was just perfect way of bringing a character who's obviously from the 20th century, was now 400 years in the future. And, and it engages the fans because, that's our time, so we can identify with them. So I thought they did a good job with that. A lot of his little one-liners.
Who else is there more to talk about? I think I can't remember all the characters that are important, so you need to help me with that.
Well, Erin Gray, who is she was a major. I cannot remember the name of her character. It just escapes me, but she was more his voice of reason to try and guide him through his new century, and then of course Tweaky and the Dr. Theopolis. I'm pretty sure that was his name. In fact, I actually have a friend of mine in Dallas. He's an avid collector. He has a life-size Tweaky with the Theopolis, the disc on his chest, and it talks and everything. Cool. Yeah, my friend, he goes all out on his collecting. But it was Tweaky in terms of great comic relief, because that voice and Wilma. That's right, Wilma. What was her last name?
Daring.
Wilma.
Daring.
Wilma Daring. That's right. Yeah, Daring. That's yeah. So I think, but her character, I mean, it was, of course, it's a sign of the time that movie was made. She didn't have as much, she was a supporting actress. And in the 70s, it wasn't, they didn't have as much, you know, as much oomph in them, you know, but she did have, you know, they had some good scenes and they had a little bit of a, you know, there was some kind of hinting at a possible romance between the two. You know, they kind of played with that every now and then, but, you know, I think it was, all in all, it was more, you know, they were good, strong colleagues, and, you know, they'd both be jumping in their fighters at the same time, and which, by the way, was cool. Those were full mock-up props, and you don't see a lot of that anymore nowadays.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Um. So those were just a little bit of the good side, people. Let's talk about the villains in Buck Rogers.
Oh, Michael Sarrazin, probably the best villain they had. Is the Emperor and the Draconian Emperor, and Michael Sarrazin. Obviously, from the original series of Star Trek, he laid the groundwork for what the Klingons were going to be, and actually he made 2 more appearances in not only Deep Space Nine but in Star Trek Voyager before he passed away. And his voice, oh my gosh! And he was in I Dream of Jeannie and obviously married to Barbara Eden. But his voice, I tell you, something about his voice was so powerful, so distinctive. I think he was the best villain in my book in Buck Rogers, definitely.
Okay. So what is it that you really like about Buck Rogers? Not only the fact that in the time that it aired that it was so few sci-fi series or movies. Is there anything you... Yes?
I think just being the time travel, being able to have a chance to go see the future, even though he couldn't go back, it was kind of a one-way trip for him. But that was you know, he went out, he was lost, and then ends up waking up and seeing Earth 400 years in the future. That was kind of cool. You know, it opens up all these, and then there's faster than light travel now. So that everybody's all about warp drive, hyperdrive, whatever. It's great because you can actually move to another solar system in a reasonable amount of time. So that was kind of cool. I like that.
Okay. So if they are going to make a reboot of it, is there something you like to change or add, or maybe you're gonna say, okay, I love if the writers are going to write a kind of story like this, or maybe inspiration from Star Trek or Star Wars?
Well, I think they would have to keep it. They need to keep it original. I think they should pull a lot more from where we're at right now in our space program. I mean, let's say, you know, it was a kind of like a miniature version of the space shuttle in the 1979 series. What if he's a pilot working for Elon Musk and he's just happens to get up and there's some kind of anomaly that pulls him off course, or, you know, and everybody, you know, he's presumed dead, and then he ends up in the future. You know, you could, something that really ties it to where we are today. I mean, that's really the best way to open a series. You know, people have to relate to it. You have to have a character who's relatable. You know, maybe some flashbacks about his life on Earth before he went up on a mission that, you know, that he was lost on, and then he shows up and, you know, in the 24th century with all this, you know, the whole galaxy opened up to him. I think you know, the special effects obviously will be better, you know, but I would hate for them to go to just pure CGI. I like them to do kind of like how the Orville and Discovery have gone, where they actually have live mock-up props, because that was something that was cool about that show. You could tell when they were shooting against, you know, actual ginormous props, and they had sound stages that were 100,000 square foot warehouses. You know, they were really doing a lot, as much live action shooting with the actors as opposed to a lot of green screen or blue screen. And in terms of the stories, I mean, that's just going to depend on the writers. I want to be surprised when I go in. I don't want to have something that I can predict in the first 5 minutes how it's going to end. You know, so it's
Okay. How recognizable has it to be for you then?
how recognizable. Well, I guess, you know, it all depends on. The thing was, if you look at the Buck Rogers of 1979 and the Buck Rogers that was in, what was it, the 30s or the, so maybe the 40s, 30s, 40s, the old black and white ones, they're totally different. There's not a thing that's remotely the same about them. So I mean, I think they could pretty much write their own ticket on that. I don't see anything. I mean, I would love to have a Tweaky back. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That would be the key right there, is to have Tweaky. He might have a little more joint movement, you know, a little more mobility, but part of the way he moved and walked was the funniest part of it, because he was kind of low tech if you compare him to, you know, other artificial life forms that have been put out on sci-fi shows, but it pulled it off. It was great. So that would be the one thing I would love to see carried on in the next movie.
Yeah,
And they might even have it where he's like he's an older robot that's been retired, and he just happens to pal with Buck because he finds him at some point, and and he becomes friends with this little robot. And he said, "Well, don't you want a better one?" No, he's great, and kind of go with that bit. So it kind of ties it to the series from the 70s, but it's obvious that the artificial life forms have probably developed a little more since the last episode, or the last incarnation of Buck Rogers. So in the reboot, you'd have a tie to the original one, and I say the original being 1979. So yeah, it'd be Tweaky. I think he'd be the key one to keep.
Yeah, I think so too, and that's the same with, for example, Muffet from Battlestar Galactica. It's something it's something also everyone would like, and Tweaky is so much as a comical note and relief that it has to be in there.
Oh yes, that's exactly, definitely great comic relief. I think that would be key to keeping them, and maybe the Starfighters they had, just make them update them a little more, but kind of keep that look that they have. I mean, it's just kind of like with the original Speed Racer cartoon, and then the movie that they did. They changed the Mach 5 a little bit, but not too terribly much. But maybe do that kind of same thing with the Starfighters they had. And of course, when they enter hyperspace, that's obviously they could make that a lot more, get a bigger wow factor, because technology's definitely improved a lot since then on visual effects.
What I'm thinking now is, do you know how popular Buck Rogers is still under people, or what the fans, or if there's a big fandom still?
I think so. I've been to, let's see, when were you living in Livingston? That was 2000. So in 2019, I went to Arlington convention, and Gil Gerard was there, and he was probably two tables over from Gigi Edgley from Farscape, and he had equally long lines as her. So I just think, looking at that, I mean, Farscape and Buck Rogers seem to have the same draw. So that was, and he was there by himself. I don't think there were any other actors from Buck Rogers. I just remember him and Gigi both being there at the same time, and yeah, he had a lot of people coming in to see him. And he also can be kind of grumpy, so it was if he can pull that many people, so that's pretty good.
Well, what I'm wondering too is if there are a lot of merchandise of Buck Rogers. Have you?
I
Wait.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot on it, but then I don't do. I mean, when I shop for stuff, I'm looking for very specific items and props, so I'm not really good at speaking to that. I haven't seen. I mean, right now, I think I talked to one store owner who does a lot of resale of toys and merchandise, and he said the Star Wars is the hugest thing at this point.
Of course.
Yeah, that's what's been like. Oh, so people have just got tons of inventory on Star Wars because it's selling so well. But
so we know that. How about the storyline of the story that has been written for Buck Rogers? What is your opinion about that?
I mean, I think it was, the movie itself was the movie could have stood alone by itself. I mean, guy pulled back, is asleep until the 24th century, gets in a big scrape with this potential invading force, and just his own take on his own tactics that from the 20th century helped turn the tide and stave them off. But after that, it pretty much became an episodic series, just like, Star Trek.
Yeah.
He wasn't like in a quest for anything. It wasn't one of those shows where, he's searching for something till the very end. It was just, went from one standalone episode to the other, So I think it was, and that's probably why that's probably why it lasted a couple of years more than most of the other sci-fi at that time, because it had a lot of variety. You didn't have to watch it from the beginning to understand it. You could just jump into whichever episode and keep watching it.
Well, what I really have to laugh about was that the fighting scenes in it. It was like it reminded when he was wearing black and etc. I was thinking, okay, that's reminds me a lot of James Bond, but also his fighting in it. Like classical fight. I'm not talking about Kirk Fu, but
yeah, Kirk Fu. That's great. Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. It was kind of a little more toned down, but then they were also trying to hit a family audience. So
yeah, and I think that's why it's also what I did like about it is that the whole yes, there were episodic features on it, but it was also like that I was thinking, okay, it's a nicer storyline, and it's also like there's a lot of action.
Mm-hmm.
And of course sci-fi, but it's also like it's not too. They're not going too far, as in for like you said. It's also like a family series, and it's exactly like, for example, with Doctor Who.
Oh yes.
It's the same. It's the same. Future thing. Yeah.
Well, do you remember Mark Leonard, the actor who played Spock's father in the original series?
Yeah.
I remember he was in an episode of Buck Rogers. And the one thing I remember about it was so weird, he was able to detach his head and put it back on. I don't know if I'm remembering this right, but I remember that really freaked me out. I thought, that is really odd. He was playing an ambassador, which was kind of funny because he was Ambassador Sarek in Star Trek, and he's some other kind of ambassador, and he had they had him in quite a wig, if I can remember that. Quite a curly-haired brown wig, and it did not look, I mean, you could obviously tell it was Mark Leonard, but that was one of the stranger ones that I remember seeing on. So yeah, they ran the gamut of serious episodes, and some that were real comical, and some that were just really bizarre.
Do you have any favorite characters in Buck Rogers?
Yeah, I honestly, Tweaky's got to be my favorite character. Always has been. Too many. That's been my favorite one for that show, definitely.
Yeah, I think he's loved by many.
Yeah, and I'm just glad the guy's still around. He's still doing the convention circuits. So that's. And one story someone told me, one of his handlers said that if you get him and Gil Gerard sitting next to each other, they both are on opposite sides of the U.S. political spectrum, and they just go at each other constantly. They're good friends, but they pick on each other. It's like it's more of an entertainment just watching those two guys in the same room than it is hearing about the show, from what I've heard.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think a lot of fans sometimes forget that a lot of fans see them as the character in one of the
Right.
fandoms and not as a person who has their own political sides of their own opinions, etc. And I think fans in particular are forgetting that sometimes.
Well, and if you notice, I think the importance of that is that a lot of times the actors' true personalities and the way they get along actually comes out in their characters really well. I mean, that's if they're good friends and they get along and they can joke with each other, then it's a lot easier for them to work together. And I mean, there's numerous examples of that. I mean, the whole Star Trek: The Next Generation cast, they were all theater actors, and between every take, they were joking around, singing, dancing. They actually had the director for the first season quit because he didn't want to deal with them. He didn't like it. He was too much of an old school, do as I say, be on your mark. And I mean, Marina Sirtis, I remember her saying, we were always on our mark. And then she turned over to Michael Dorn and said, Dorney will forget his lines, but he would be on his mark ready. So, and then in Deep Space Nine, the Armin Shimmerman, the one who played Quark, he brought all the characters, the supporting characters, over to his house for dinner every night, and they would rehearse their scenes.
Yeah,
Which is,
yeah.
the writers were like, when you build those kind of personal relationships, you do a better job. I mean, that's just the way it is in any company. When people work together good and they click together and then go out and have socialize and then go to work, they make a better team. So
Yeah,
their personal lives do help.
I remember in one of the interviews of TNG that Patrick Stewart was the same as the director. He wanted to be serious and there couldn't be enjoy. And it was I think it was Jonathan Frakes, and he was the worst of them all. I know that.
More, he liked to goof off the most.
Yeah. Still, because if you watch the behind the scenes from Discovery that he is directing, everyone is saying if you put him and some of the cast members from TNG together, you can't work because they have shenanigans after shenanigans, and they are they just going back in time and just tell you stories when they were in TNG.
Yeah, I think that was really strong. I think Marina Sirtis, when she had been in a Q&A, she said they finally brought Patrick Stewart around within the first season. It was, but she did make a comment that after Deep Space Nine came on the air, she said all of the crew, the grips, the cameramen, they went over to work on Deep Space Nine, and they got a new crew. So she would walk over to the Deep Space Nine set to say hi to all her former friends working there, and they would just be like, "Oh, so glad to see you," and because it was she called it Deep Sleep Nine. She said it was so serious. She said Avery Brooks he ran a tight ship. He was so professional. There was no goofing off middle. She said it was like a mausoleum over there. She said it was so scary. And so she'd go over there and just shake it up. And then,
go to the TNG set to rewind.
Yeah. So that was because those two shows ran for a few years in tandem.
Yeah.
And so sound stages that were literally next door to each other.
Yeah. And of course, there are some of the characters from TNG who transferred over to Deep Space Nine.
Oh, yeah. And, I honestly, in the actors, their personal lives is what drives them to get into new episodes. I mean, like Erin Gray, all of what she did is as that Major Deering on Buck Rogers got her back into Star Trek.
Yeah.
Colonel. She was a major, I think, at first when the movie came out. Yes, okay. So,
Sorry about that.
yeah, so I got corrected. She said, no, it's Colonel Deering. I was like, yeah, but it was Major in the movie, and I'm thinking the movie. That's funny. That's actually, now it just popped in my head. That's the same thing they did with Major Kira in Deep Space Nine. For all 6 years, she's Major, and then she gets promoted to Colonel right in the last season. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, why don't you give us a promotion a little earlier, you know?
Well, I think that's the same thing with Harry Kim or Forever
Oh, I was just
Innocent.
thinking that. What do you think she said? Harry Kim. She brought up Harry.
Oh, yes.
Yes, he was the
Sorry.
poor Harry Kim. Yeah, that was, yeah, and that actor, that personally offended him. I don't think to this day he doesn't talk about that, and his going to
he
the writers.
talks about
what
it.
the heck?
Do you? And this, sorry, guys, this is a little bit of off topic now, but have you ever listened to his Garrett Wangs and Robin Duncan Minew's podcast, The Delta Flyers?
No, I haven't. I'll have to
You
look that up.
haven't? Oh, you're missing a lot.
I'll
But
have
that's
to
also
check that out because I know Sophia would love that. I mean, that's her. She's biggest Voyager fan.
And
So
you know,
yeah, we'll have to check that out.
the fun part is that they're doing it together, but they rewatching every week an episode in quality following, and
Oh, wow.
but because they have filmed it, they have a lot of ins and outs from when they filmed it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
it's very nice to hear also the backstories around it and what they were thinking and etc. And they have a funny part of making haikus and lyrics for the episode.
Oh, that's great. Well, that. I think after the show has had such a long run, 7 years, even if it's 3 years, 4 years, those actors, they have the opportunity to just do the convention circuit indefinitely because there's always such a strong fan base for any series that gets a following that, that's, and I think that's goes the same for, not only Star Trek, but Buck Rogers, and Babylon 5. I know Bruce Boxleiter was at a convention I went to a couple of years ago, and next to him was the guy who played Gary Mitchell on the original Star Trek series. I cannot pronounce Gary Lockwood. That's his name, Gary Lockwood. And, so he still has a huge fan following. I mean, he did one episode of Star Trek, but then he did the movie 2001 Space Odyssey. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you stick in Star Trek? He says, well, I had a TV series I didn't know about, and then I had a movie deal. He says, it was a question of economics. I was like, well, too bad. He said, your character would have been pretty cool. But
So-
he's still doing the convention circuit. And I think people that stuck with the original Star Trek, obviously, Leonard Nimoy and George Takei is still just reaping lots of benefits from Star Trek. I think even way more than one movie deal would get you. I mean, he's written books. He's, toured the convention circuit, and that's.
And so if a teenager who would walk up to you and you have to tell him about Buck Rogers or advise him what kind of what is so good about Buck Rogers, what would you tell them?
I would say, somebody who's been raised on all this new science fiction and types of action, I'd say you got to put yourself back in time. Remember, this is really old, and don't set your expectations on special effects. Listen more to the storyline, and think about, look at it from the story itself and put yourself in the shoes of the character as opposed to trying to be wowed by it. Because again, if you watch the original movie, I mean, it's low tech compared to today's productions. So but the thing is, there are people, I mean, I know an 11-year-old who loves the original Star Trek series and loves the original Star Trek cartoon. You never know. People fall in love with something, they're gonna pursue it no matter what the special effects are. But if they've seen one and they love it and say, "Should I keep watching it?" I'd say, "Hey, as long as it entertains you and it's speaking to you, just keep pressing on."
Yeah, I remember when I started with Star Trek, I started with TNG. And when in the first episode they separated the saucer and the battle bridge, that was the
Mm-hmm.
thing that got me hooked on Star Trek.
Oh, and
And
it got you hooked on that Enterprise D too, I bet.
yeah, it is. I always said the Enterprise D and Camp Picard are my first Star Trek introduction, so they always have a special place in my heart. So yeah, but I can recognize that yeah. So you can hook by something that is very small or not even in all the high tech what we have nowadays,
That's true.
and I think and that's what I was talking. I talked with my mom about that last week. I was watching with my nieces. What was it? What of the kind? I thought it was about the new Winnie the Pooh, like CG character, etc. And it
Mm-hmm.
didn't look that I was saying. I was saying to my mom, I'm pitifying my nieces because this is not how I know it. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to the nostalgic one, like in the 60s, 70s, 80s,
Mm-hmm.
when they draw it like 2D, if I can say it like
Yes,
that.
yes.
So, yeah, I think but it still have a high entertainment value.
Oh, yes. And a lot of good science fiction. It's a way to tell stories and make people think about things. There's I guess, a good example. I think a line, my favorite line. I can't quote it exactly, but it was an episode of Star Trek Voyager called "The Muse." That's probably my favorite episode of any sci-fi series, and it was about. You'd have to look it up and go see it, but it basically B'Elanna Torres crashes on a planet that's basically at the Iron Age, and an actor, a writer, finds her, and ends up accessing the computer's the personal logs, even though, and he starts writing the story of Voyager, and his whole point for writing was to try and sway the the feudal lord that ran their village not to go to war. And he said sometimes words can change a person. Words they hear in stories can maybe make the difference between going to war and not going to war. And I thought that brings me to tears every time I see that episode, because it is so prophetic of what art is. Art can imitate life, but art can also influence life. And
Hmm.
I think writers and all of us who deal with science fiction and what we do with Pathfinder and stuff is we really want to set a shining example of a great future for humanity. I think if you don't keep that hope up, you've got to always keep that shining star ahead to reach for, to bring hope to people. And we've had people come up to us at conventions and tell us that they love what we're doing. They love the positiveness and how accepted they are when they come to our booth, and we, you know, go through the whole routine with them and get them on camera. And it's just, it makes it's fulfilling to us, but it's also fulfilling to the fans. And it kind of keeps that dream alive that one day, humanity is going to reach the stars. We're going to be a unified species out in space. We're not going to be fighting amongst ourselves. We'll grow past prejudice. We'll go, grow past, greed and all that. I mean, that's a great dream for a utopian future. So I think that's the best thing about sci-fi is that it provides that area to write about that kind of stuff and bring that kind of hope to people.
Yeah, indeed. Um, so I think we are closing to the end of the episode. Is there something you'd like to add?
Okay. Oh no, for me, no. I think I've already definitely said my fill, and I have enjoyed it. It's been an honor, and thank you so much for inviting me on your show. And
Yeah, it was nice to talk to you too. Thank you for joining me. And who knows, in the future soon, we have another lovely conversation about another subject that we both love. And I think about Star Trek we always can talk about.
Oh, yeah, we can always come there. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing when you finish the Enterprise D, that big...
Paul, it's going to be a disaster. I don't know if you have heard about it, but Eagle Moss is bankrupt.
Oh no! Yes, I did hear that. I hear
and,
that. So,
well, there are companies who are looking into it to buy it, because there is a company in Japan who has all the blueprints of it. So if they are getting all those permissions and get all the claims that they can do it, but they are telling that they will bring out the parts so that you can finish it.
Oh, so you didn't get all the parts yet? Oh, I'm so sorry.
But
I didn't know that.
No, it is like they went to issue 2021, and there are like 31 issues. So we're almost there, and it was about 4 months ago that the whole shenanigans stopped, and nobody didn't know everything. And then it came out, okay, we're going to have an administrator for everything, because we are more or less bankrupt, and you could see that they couldn't handle the question of people that they really wanted to build the Enterprise D. But they have more projects like the Buzz of A-Team, the Millennium Falcon.
Wow.
They got Kit from the Knight Rider. So it's been a real big issue how that all came to work. And well, we are waiting now for 5 months already to hear some more things, and well, it's going slow, but okay. We were saying, okay, we don't care about who is taking over. The only thing what we want to do is build it off. And
finish it,
because, like I said, it's a huge one. And there are even companies who are making a smaller one. But I was saying, and there were also people who are offering, well, if you can't finish it, there's also if you put everything, break everything up, you can build some kind of like a Starbase 1 of it.
Oh, yeah, so modify it, yeah.
Modify it, yeah. So, but we were saying, okay, we really love it, the original, and we really like to finish the build. And it is huge. It's really huge.
Oh, I know, I'll bet. I know, I was in a store in Cincinnati, and it's called The Toy Store, and it was very close to the branch for my company that I was out doing an audit on. And I went in the store, and I got 2 XL Eagle Moss models for $40 each, and they normally they normally run $80.
Yeah.
And they just said, yeah, nobody wants them. I got a Voyager, which is great because Pathfinder is an Intrepid class starship, and I got the original series Constitution class, so that was a great find. So I now every time I go to a different city, I'm checking out the nearest sci-fi stores because they're just clearing these Eagle Mosses out.
Yeah, that's true. It's I don't want to say it's a disaster, but and you see it online as well. People are selling it now because they can have big bucks out of it now because they don't make it anymore.
Yep, I know that happens. That sounds like that's the story of any business through time. Like what was the Etzel? If you look up the Etzel, the car back in the 1950s, it's a one hit wonder, and then it didn't work, and people were left with a junker they couldn't drive. and then now there's collectors who want to build them because they were so bad they became popular. So you never
Yeah.
know. The thing about collectors, they're really fickle. They may collect something because it's horrible or even because it's unfinished. That in and
Yeah,
of
yeah.
itself could be a selling point one day. So never throw it away.
No, 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 no. No,
Yeah.
we even thinking of if they not going to bring the parts out, maybe we can figure out something to 3D print it or whatever.
Yeah.
Because yeah, we really like to finish it, and especially because oh my god, it's heavy. You
I'll
don't want to
bet.
know. It's
I'll
really
bet.
heavy.
It's all die-cast metal. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's but yeah, it's something we always looked forward to it, especially my fiance. He's the builder. And I was saying, okay, babe, we need to do this because I want the Enterprise D, and he knows that I really love the Enterprise D. So he said, okay, we're going to do it, and then this problem hits, but okay.
Well, you know, as they say, teamwork makes the dream work. So you'll figure it out.
Exactly. But Paul, thank you once again, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. And y'all have a great day and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Dear listeners, thank you for listening, and join me in 2 weeks for a new episode of Arenda Talks. The episode we're talking about is RoboCop. You can listen, subscribe, and comment to Arenda Talks on the YouTube channel or join the Facebook group. I also like to tell you about my 2 other podcasts called Girls Talking Track and Arenda's Book Club, Smooth Jazz, Tea and Books. Girls Talking Track is a podcast hosted by 2 female trackers who will recap every 2 weeks an episode of Star Trek, starting with TNG. All the episodes will be recapped and chronically following. Girls Talking Track is also to listen, follow and subscribe on Anchor, Google Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, or on your favorite podcast app. We also have a Facebook group and a YouTube channel. Every 10th episode will be a video episode, so you guys can see us when we talk about the episode. If you like to comment on the episode or talk with us about the Star Trek episode we just recapped, you can reach out on the Facebook group or the YouTube channel. Arenda's Book Club, Smooth Jazz, Tea and Books is a podcast that will discuss books of all genres, except for thrillers and horror. I don't like to read those. My perfect picture while reading a book is in front of the fireplace, loads of tea and smooth jazz in the background. If you like to discuss with me or us the books we are reading, you can do that on the Facebook group or the YouTube channel. I also like to organize live readings and live book discussions events. So join me, reading with me, and discuss with me the books we are reading. I will see you in 2 weeks.